The late spring of 1964, when I was a tender but lustful 16, my buddy Thomas, he didn't like being called Tommy, up and joined the Navy. Thomas was a year older, 17, not much of a scholar, and since Vietnam was heating up, he figured he'd rather sit in a battleship offshore than slogging around in the rice paddies. Now, Thomas was dating Millie, who was 15 and quite the hottie, and they decided that as soon as he got through basic training and whatnot, he would come home and they would get married. Yeah, I know, 15. But this was Louisiana, and at least she wasn't his sister. So he gave her an engagement ring, and off to the Navy he went. 6 weeks or so later, I got a call from Thomas, who was in San Diego. He got word, he said, from somebody who said that Millie was going out on him. Did I know anything about that? Not me, nope. I hadn't seen her since he left. Her school was across town from mine, and we didn't run in the same circles. Millie was 15, an aforementioned hottie, and maybe it shouldn't have been such a surprise, what with Thomas being 2,000 miles away and the warm spring nights being long and not so exciting to sit at home alone. So what did he want me to do? Go and get my ring back. Me? Why me? You're my friend, right? Attend here, class, the lesson. There are two choices when it comes to stepping in between your friend and his girl in such instances. 1. Run away and do not consider the idea. 2. Run away and do not consider the idea. There's maybe a third choice. 3. Run away and do not consider the idea. But I was 16. I had almost no experience with the grand game of romance and its various rules and regulations. I didn't know any better. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is tragedy waiting to happen. Okay, I said, I'll do it. So I called Millie up. I need to talk to you, I said. Sure, come by Friday night. I arrived at Millie's house Friday night. The door opened, and there was Millie, dressed to go out, hotter than an Arizona 4th of July. You could bounce quarters off of her, she was so tight. Let's go, she said. Go where? We can't talk here. My mother is here. Oh, yeah, well, okay, I could understand that. That made sense. So we piled into my 59 Chevy and took off. Now, that car had a bench front seat, and Millie sat about 15 feet away by the passenger door, which is where she was supposed to sit, until we cleared the first corner, at which point she slid across the expansive Detroit cushion, latched into me, and stuck her tongue into my ear. Now, let's be completely honest here. My first reaction was not, oh my God, what are you doing? Get away from me. I was 16. I could get an erection putting my socks on. I was a biological switchblade. Hit a button, sprawling anything female would push it. Having did I mention she was hot? Teenage girl nibbling my earlobe and breathing heavily into my neck set my always simmering hormones raging into a boil a hell of a lot faster than putting my socks on. So, I admit it. I kind of leaned into it. But only for a minute, really. We got to a traffic light. I moved away. Look, this is not a good idea. What about Thomas? She said, and I quote, Thomas is an old shithead. Yeah, well, I kind of agreed with that, for no other reasons than he'd sent me to get his fucking ring back, but I shook my head and said, listen, he wants his ring back, I managed to say. Piss on him. If he wants it back, he can ask me for it in person. This conversation was essentially over, and not wanting to be a bigger bastard than I already thought I was, I said, fine, I'm taking you home, which I did. Now, I consider this latter action to be one of my finest and bravest accomplishments as a man, because, still dealing in truth here, I would much rather have gone to the submarine races and discussed that old shithead Thomas at length with Millie upon that nice big car seat, which she was obviously ready and willing to do. Did I mention that I was a walking advertisement for erectile function in the American teenager? And that she was hot? I couldn't call Thomas because telephones weren't handy for him, so I had to wait a few days until he called me. You get my ring back? Well, no. She said if you want it, you have to ask for it in person. What else did she say? Now, here, the next part of the lesson. When asked such a question, the wrong answer, the absolutely wrong answer is, well, she called you an old shithead, and she made a move on me. I should not have said that. Should not have said that. But I did say it. That whore, he exclaimed outrageously. That bitch, that whore, pronounced as it were spelled H-O-O-R. He chewed on and spewed on that for a while, and I nodded and said, aha, you're right, I'm sorry, and then he finally ran down, and that was that. But of course, that's not the end of the story. Fast forward a couple of weeks. Thomas, now hating the Navy, came home on leave, and he went to see Millie to get his ring back. I wasn't there. I didn't hear the conversation. But in my mind, while it might have begun with, "I want my ring back, you whore," it almost certainly moved to tongue in somebody's ear and further use of a big old automobile seat in a real hurry. A 17-year-old seaman, insert obvious pun here, was not so old that his juices had dried up either. And did I mention that she was hot? So Thomas and Millie smoothed things over. All was well. Except, coming to the point now, guess who the villain became in this piece? Anyone? You there laughing your ass off? Go ahead, tell the class. Who was it called Thomas a shithead? Who was it said his beloved was a whore? Yep, that's correct. Not them. No, it was that lying scum backstabbing other guy. What's his name? Oh yeah, Things were never the same between Thomas and me. He and Millie got married a year later, sneaked off to Mississippi to do it where the age of consent is, 9? I wasn't invited. Thomas and Millie had a couple of kids. The marriage lasted almost 3 years and then they split up. Thomas, who later became addicted to heroin, was tossed out of the Navy a few months after he joined up. Medical discharge, whatever the Navy's equivalent was of a Section 8, which is to say he was bonkers. Millie was married twice more, with 4 or 5 additional kids before I lost track of her. Probably living in a trailer, if she's still alive, and if I had to guess, no longer in any way, shape, form, especially form, hot. As far as I can tell, neither of them lived happily ever after. But you know what? I did, despite my youthful stupidity. Thus endeth the lesson.